Hey everyone, Pastor Tim here, back with my good friend Dr. Michael Gurian after his triumphant time with us for our Father's Day sermon, which is great. Michael, appreciated that. It's good to have you with us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
I've asked Michael to come and chat with us today a little bit about our mental well-being. And here in Phoenix, we're seeing our cases go up. And there's a lot of talk about masks and if you can stay home, stay home. And of course, it's 110 degrees today as we tape this. And so we're not necessarily going outside anyway. And increasingly, we're hearing that people are concerned about mental health issues and staying sane. And Michael not only does a lot of work with boys and girls and brain research, but is also a behavioral therapist. So Michael, let me just start with you, and let's start with sort of some broad strokes. As we've been walking through this COVID experience together, what are some of the emotional, mental, even physical challenges people are starting to experience these days?
Well, there's certainly a lot of fear and anxiety that brings it, that just increases anxiety for people, especially people who already have anxiety issues, anxiety disorder or anxiety issues, then that it doubles down on their anxiety. And then with unemployment and those sorts of things, it's even, can we say, goes beyond anxiety in the sense that a lot of people are experiencing despair. It's despair from losing jobs. It's depression, obviously clinical depression or situational depression. But there's also a lot of despair, and we're starting to see, the reports come in of increased suicides. And so on the negative side, I think is that, anxiety, depression, all on those spectrums. I think that we can help ourselves try to make positives out of it. But first we have to get through anxiety and depression.
So a lot of people have been isolated for a long time. Jan and I are fortunate that we're here. We love each other. We're not getting on each other's nerves. But I think of all of the folks who are watching who maybe spend at least a part of their day or maybe all day long isolated by themselves, away from people, trying to get their brains around it. We're bombarded with bad news all the time. What are some things? Let's start kind of with anxiety, fear, because I know depression, they all have some similar things, but they also function a bit differently. For people who are feeling overly anxious or claustrophobic or fearful, what are some things that they can do, even if they're socially distancing and isolating and staying at home, to keep themselves mentally and emotionally fit?
So yeah, let's take different groups. So a group of people where they're alone. So
Yeah.
Unlike you and Jan, let's say where they're alone, or Gil and myself. So for that group of people, gonna want to turn off as much as possible, turn off media, social media, turn that stuff off, because that just creates rumination loops and creates more anxiety and more fear, more despair. And then if you're taking meds, take those meds, whatever are for anxiety, whatever you're doing that you're already being treated for anxiety, continue. If you've dropped out of therapy or counseling, like it wasn't needed, you had kind of beat that demon and you weren't in counseling anymore, but previous to say February or March, I would go back in counseling now, and everyone's doing telehealth, so you can be in your house and get counseling and therapy. It's very hot where you are. That's really true. But as much as possible, get outdoors. So that might mean in the mornings and in the evenings, maybe. Or if you're a night owl, if the person's a night owl, at 10 or 11 p.m. or something, go out, because what's out in nature is good for your brain. It gets you out of the hole. Because it's like living in a cave or a hole. It's not really human. So for that group of people, for people who are together, where there's two people, let's say like you two or Gail and myself, it is still really good to take time off from each other so that things don't build up. There is one of the things that happens with anxiety and depression is anger. It comes with it for some people. I mean, for all people to some extent, but for some people, they operate. That's how their brain's set up. They're going to get angry, and it's how they process their depression. It's how they process their anxiety. and deflect it or project it. So good to cut down on that anger if we can take some time away from each other, and don't trigger each other. You know what each other's triggers are. Don't trigger, because someone's going to get angry and it's going to become a battle. So I would say for people who are together, that they should do all the other things, but also, get time off. The positive of this is that people, like, if you're together, you can make this a positive by practicing things like the art of forgiveness, by practicing self-management, self-regulation, by self-talk and talking yourself out of the anger. This is a real proving ground and practice ground for all of the things that we know we should be doing to keep our relationships strong and to keep ourselves strong. And I mean, that can be a positive. This gives us a few months to practice.
I want to come to the anger for a minute, because we see so much of that. We always see that in our country, especially around election time, but now in particular, where COVID has been politicized, wearing masks has been politicized, people posting their opinions on Facebook, and then somebody turn around and posting something that tells them they're idiots. And almost everything we say right now, we're getting angry with each other. And yet this is a time, I think, particularly around the issue of race, where we have an opportunity, particularly those of us who have white skin, to really do some learning. And yet so much of our learning is filtered through anger, because we might say something, here's what I think I'm learning, and someone will come back and they'll just hammer you for the wrong use of a word or something. How do we use this time to grow, especially in areas like racism or something else, and to do it without social media? I don't know that people even know how to do that anymore.
Well, and I think maybe also you're getting at the fact that we can't all meet together in one room very closely either, because really what we should be doing is meeting. So social media is not a great way, I think, to be doing anything right now, whether it's, as I think you're pointing out, whether it's whatever the topic is, whether it's COVID, whether it's election, whether it's race, everything gets politicized. And so, I mean, maybe check in with social media 10 minutes a day, but the social change that we're working toward, that social change is going to happen by people in communities, making that change in the work that they're doing in communities, which still can get done via Zoom. Not as well, certain things can't get done, but a lot of it, we're working on pilots there where you are in Phoenix, and we're all part of that, and we're doing as much as we can of that via Zoom, because that's what we have right now. But we don't have to be on social media to do that work. And I think now is a time to avoid, to a great extent, avoid social media. Just monitor it. Whatever your cause, whatever one's cause is right now, just say this: I'm going to spend 15 minutes a day on social media. I'm going to ritualize it to whatever is the time, like 6 p.m. or whatever is the time that is a good check-in time for the person. And then, that's it. Because the social media, it triggers the brain, it hits the dopamine centers, it triggers the amygdala. It's set up to keep us agitated, anxious, and depressed. That's really how it's set up. And then that's how it hooks us. It's just like when people ask about the psychology of video games. Why do they hook people? Or the psychology of porn. Why does that hook people? Well, it hooks people by getting involved in their reward pathways and rewiring reward pathways. And that a lot of how the brain rewires is by what dopamine does in these reward pathways. And so as a person gets rewarded, because the anger feels quite rewarding. I go on social media, I read something that I disagree with, I send some terrible thing back or whatever it is, that actually for instantaneously feels rewarding, but ultimately it's not. Ultimately, it just increases the darkness. And so that's why we just want to ritualize it and then be done with it. And then meanwhile, on the telephone, on Zoom, on Skype, however it is done, and in person, I mean, we can still get together for meetings 6 feet apart, et cetera. That's where the work has to be done.
Right.
Just know that social media is going to increase your sadness and anger. Just go into every day knowing that, and maybe that'll help titrate it.
Yeah. Or at the very least, make sure you have put in the filters you need to make sure you're only connecting with people right now who make you feel good, or who are positive in their posts and so on.
Yeah.
Again, there have been many, many videos I've been put onto through like Facebook that have been very helpful for me. But I find I have to keep working through all the vitriol to get to some really good stuff. And it does get wearing after a while. Now,
yeah, it is wearing.
How would you describe the difference between someone who is anxious during this time and someone who is depressed during this time?
Well, I think right now they're working together. I think it's hard to completely distinguish because it's at some level, everyone right now is anxious.
Mm-hmm.
And we are all anxious at whatever is the target for our minds on our anxiety. Like, is it job loss or diminishment of job or diminished income, projecting what the revenues of the states are going to do that'll affect everything else, projecting is my business going to close or is that business going to close, how will that affect me? So economically, I think everyone a little bit is anxious. And when I say everyone, I know obviously there are some very wealthy people this wouldn't apply to, but I think that there's that, and that's a blanket anxiety that most people are experiencing. Then there's anxiety disorder. Is that triggering this anxiety disorder, which immobilizes a person, where you're having to ruminate so much. I mean, you're immobilized for hours every day. I don't know what the numbers of that would be. Right now, I'm guessing it's going to be 10 to 20% of Americans. I'm going to guess it could be higher. It's hard to know that now because we don't have studies and data. Then depression, I would say that similarly, that everyone right now is a little bit depressed. And I just used the word everyone, which you should never use, because obviously there must be some people out there who are just doing great right now, and there's no depression for them. But I think that most people are battling some feelings of sadness. And if they're doing well economically or whatever, they're still not seeing their family. They're still not connecting. They're still not relating. And we've gotten to the point where Zoom is, we all see the flaws in. I mean, Zoom is great. Obviously, we're on Zoom. It's good. But for carrying on human relationships and for all of that attachment stuff, we got to do that in person, some of it. So we're all a little bit, or most of us are a little bit depressed around the loss of all this connection. It's a kind of depression, grief. So I guess long story short is I think it's very hard to tell them apart right now, unless it's a disorder, which is treatable, an anxiety or depressive disorder, or a situational depression that sends us toward contemplating suicide, that we have to get counseling right away. But this kind of low grade depression, anxiety, I think are pretty mixed up with each other right now. And you feel the anxiety at like 9 a.m. or something, but you're feeling the depression by 5 p.m., and we're kind of going back and forth between these two. And ultimately, we're going to have to, we are going to have to free ourselves, and we should not stay in this state for a year to 18 more months. As human beings. So our country and our people and our legislators and everyone is right now in the thick of it, and handling this as specific disease protocols that specific people are saying we should all do, and that's where we're at now. We all need to be thinking ahead, though, based on this anxiety and depression. We need to be thinking ahead to whenever it happens, a month from now, 2 months from now, whenever it is, where we don't have a vaccine and these things aren't really working. They're not really going to work. They just feel like right now they will, whether you wear a mask or don't wear a mask, whether you socially distance. It's all within a month or two, we're going to see that no matter what choices we make in this regard, we're going to have more businesses closed down, which will increase the depression, anxiety there, or we'll have some less people die, but we have to as a population be looking at anxiety and depression en masse and start making, within a month or two, decisions about how we handle this based on those things, and how we want to fight those things,
Hmm.
as opposed to now, in which we don't really think about those things. You did by bringing it up, but we don't think about that. We just think about, if you wear a mask, maybe so and so won't die.
Right.
Right? We're just thinking about what we've been told to think about, which is how effective is a mask. We think it's a little bit effective, et cetera. I'm glad you're bringing this up, because a month or two from now, we can't be talking about that. There will be too many decimated lives, and we have to start getting everyone to start thinking about depression and anxiety. And ultimately, what that's going to mean is that some people are going to die. We are not going to be able to save everybody. Unfortunately, it's not a good disease, but we are going to save a lot of suicides. We're going to save a lot of people on the other side, and it is going to be a trade-off.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it will be a trade-off.
Yeah, and that's hard stuff for all of us. So
it just increases our fear and our depression.
But the good news, what you're saying right now, is in this time we're in, there are really practical things we can do to protect our emotional well-being. And you've mentioned get outdoors when you can, go for a walk, stay connected through Zoom if necessary, or get together 6 feet apart. Try to turn off the bad news all the time. Find other sources of good news, reading a book, laughing at a movie, whatever it might be. You're also a man who takes your spirituality seriously, and you have found that meditation or prayer has been helpful. Talk a little bit about why that's so helpful in our lives, regardless of how we do it.
Yeah, I think it does a couple things. So I have daily, meditation and prayer rituals in the morning, and I've had for decades. I mean, I really believe in that. I know it centers me, and I think a couple things are happening. One thing that's happening is everything that is happening to me, us, even in this depression, anxiety, fear, all of that, I can give that to, a higher power, a greater being. I can give that, and I can be humble and know that this is all all of what is happening is in a much larger sphere. And so some of it can come off of me and, go into the universe or God or whatever someone would say. And that humility, and then that letting go and release is very important. It's spiritually important because it's so important to the brain, because spirituality happens in the brain, right? We also know it's ethereal, but in terms of how I feel it in my brain. And so that's that higher power, and giving it up is one part of it. The other part of it is that meditation, prayer, these things, even a walking meditation, a nature meditation, any kind of that solitude and self-focus, which is humble self-focus, any of that does put things in perspective, so that an individual feels a connection to something that's, like we said, larger, but also something that is not mired in what we're involved in. And by moving things around in the brain, we're giving ourselves a better chance of kind of living in the light. And in other words, of having the internal tools, so that later in the day, I turn off the social media. And some of my motivation for doing that is that when I went in for a half hour and I was in solitude, I realized how good that felt. Yep. And I realized how bad social media feels, et cetera. So I think it does a couple things to the brain that are essential. And if we don't, now more than ever, prayer now more than ever, meditation now more than ever. If you weren't doing it before, do a half hour to an hour now, even if you combine it with a walk, in which we're not taking in any stimuli from TV, computers, phones, in which we're separate from, and we can shut off the parietal. The parietal is the part that orients us. When you meditate and pray, that gets shut off. And everyone knows what that feels like who meditates and prays. You know what it feels like to disorient from the world around us. And your brain moves functioning over to the temporal lobe, for instance, to these other parts of the brain that can heal us. And so then you mine that, and you drink from that water during the day, and it keeps you safer, keeps you away from the darkness.
Yeah. Years ago, when I was first introduced to meditation, and these were short ones, 5-10 minutes a day, the person said, "You may not feel a benefit today, tomorrow from it." He said, "But every time you meditate, you're putting money in the bank, and you're training yourself. So when that moment comes, and suddenly you're feeling overwhelmed, you automatically know what to do. You start to breathe. Whatever your mantra might be, if you have a mantra, or you just slow down, you're putting money in the bank, you're building up the habit or the resources you're going to need. And man, these resources are being depleted pretty quickly in these days. So these are such important things for us to be doing. So I'm going to catch you off guard here probably with something, but when you are looking for that one TV show or movie to watch that completely distracts you and just makes you laugh, you got one?
Oh, the show that makes me laugh is Modern Family. That cracks me up. Well, yeah, I probably a lot of people have heard of it because I think it is quite popular. But it's this family, and the things they do. I mean, it feels realistic, but it's hilarious.
Yep.
Some episodes better than others, but it's like a combination of that could be a real family,
Yes.
and they sure are funny.
Yeah.
So if you made me pick, the first thing that came to me was that.
Good. Well, Jan and I saw every episode. We were faithful to that from the day it came out till it ended. And I agree with you. It was one of the greats. One of the greats.
Yeah, I guess, they've ended, right? I think they just finished.
Yep.
I don't think we're going to get any more. The 11th season finished, right? And we're done. But we can watch the reruns.
Yep, that's right. Hey, Michael, thank you so much, as always. We are so appreciative of you being a friend of the congregation and all that you do to inspire us. And you and I are going to be together, hopefully in October, for a Helping Boys Thrive Summit. We're going to let our congregation know more about that coming up. So this is not the last that you will see of Michael. He'll be around. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah. Anyway, I can get there. I'll get there.
Thank you.
Thank you.